All right, Dave, welcome to the Scenic Route podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's been, I feel like it's probably been almost a year since I've done a podcast. So
You're a big podcast guy.
not really.
One a year?
It's going to be a rough one, but I've got you along with me to help out. So
Yeah, I haven't done one in a long time too. We started the same thing and we were like, oh, we'll do this every week. And then it gets to real life and you're like, oh, we haven't done it in 3 months. So I'm actually jumping on a podcast with you before I even got my one done. So I'm happy to be at least doing something on a podcast.
well, it's going to be fun because, most of the people that I've had on so far, I kind of know their story and I know what we're going to talk about. Like I'll usually have a few points even that I want to hit. But Dave, I know we did what to me is probably one of the craziest drift events of all time together. I know that you've been involved with Drift Masters, but I don't know how you got there. I don't know the path that you took. And this podcast, the focus is to kind of bring the crazy shit that we do back to reality to understand it's it's just a series of choices, a series of busting your ass to get where you are. And I'm excited to kind of hear how you got where you are.
Yeah, it's an interesting story because I was saying this to I'm on the US tour at the moment, and I send tours it sounds like I'm an act that of any importance, but we're touring around just kind of hanging out with people and making cool car content for drift games. But Neil, who's with me, is from another YouTube channel, and he was asking me the same thing, and how did you get here? And I'm like, I have sometimes no idea. I'm not the best driver in the world, but I get opportunities to drive. I'm not the best at anything, but I've got a lot of enthusiasm and a good team. And the story, I think what I have more than anybody is experience of what not to do over the last couple of years. So I started off, like everyone else, not really thinking anything like a career out of cars at all. I loved cars. I was always passionate since I was a kid, Hot Wheels, all that stuff. So all my life into cars, but nobody around me was into cars. I didn't have a family member, didn't have an uncle, didn't have any space, lived in an urban environment. So it was like computer games, Gran Turismo, Forza. That was pretty much it. Went to college, did marketing, did a lot of business stuff, but I didn't really like it that much. I kind of just felt like I didn't really belong in any of it. And when I left college, during college, I started DJing. So that was I love music. I was DJing hip hop stuff, which is unusual in Ireland, but that's what I did. And it was I loved it. It was buzz of being kind of live and talking to people. I did a lot of talking for a DJ, which is unusual, but we did a lot of interactive stuff, a lot of student nights. So with that, I had a lot of expendable income. So I'm young, DJing 4 nights a week in college, and I love cars. So I started buying JDM cars. So I went through a lot, like Evos and Supras. And
what year is this, just to give context?
This is 2000 and... This would be 2008 maybe. So
okay, so the golden era cars were only a few years old.
At this stage in Ireland, we had this huge JDM boom. So we were taking every car from Japan, whether it was a Tokyo Auto Salon, drag car, stock car, we couldn't move. You could throw a rock and hit an S13 at that point or a 15.
Wow.
So before you guys had all this, hype on these cars, we had them and they were not that special because they were all $5,000 to $10,000. So we were the scumbags driving around in S15s. I had an S15 in college, and this was cheaper than a Golf hatchback to have in college. So nobody looked at the S15 and went, this is great. They just went, he's got some stupid 99 Nissan thing. And that was pretty much it. So we were modifying these cars. We were the outcasts. They weren't like they are now, which is a really, I don't know, everyone kind of goes, wow, But back then it was just, we would swap them. They were all $7,000. So you'd swap a Skyline for an S15, for an Integra. Nobody cared. They were worth nothing. Only the people in the scene really cared what they were. So I got really into that scene. And then what happened was, it was just a simple conversation that started my entire career. So I was DJing in Dublin and I was doing all these things. And a lot of these car guys would come to the club I was working in, and they had at the time, Ireland was really early on drifting. So the guy who started drifting in Ireland had just got the option DVD and just went and did it. So Ireland had really kicked into gear at this point. Now I'm in 2010 at this point, and I've never really had much interest in drifting. I liked JDM cars, I liked modifying them rear wheel drive, but the passion of the competition side of it wasn't really there for me. I didn't have anyone I knew that did it really. So I was DJing, this guy came in and said, oh, we're doing this event, and the Pro-Am commentator can't turn up for some reason. You talk good, you kind of know cars. Do you want to just come along and do it? And I'm like, I have no idea, anything about how the rules work, how the competition works, nothing. I just said, yeah. And I was putting my car in the show anyway, so I said, I'll just do it, Pro-Am, whatever. So I turn up, super nervous. Sorry, before I turn up, that night, I go, well, I can't go to a competition without knowing anything about how the competition. I'm just going to sound the stupidest person in the world. So I watched a Formula D round. And at that time, it was 2010. So Vaughan had that was his championship year. So I was watching it, listening to Jared and going, okay, that's the lingo a little bit, and oh, that's a clipping point, and that's how that works. So I turn up the next day, I'm like kind of figuring it out, and this is way back 2010, so that's still quite late. Drifting had been maybe 5 or 6 years in Ireland, maybe more actually in Ireland at that point. James Dean was at that event. I think he was only like 16 years of age. All this stuff. Dean Carney was competing at that point. And then, just made it up, absolutely bluffed the whole day. And then they said, oh, you're really good. Do you want to do the Sunday, the pro event? And I did commentary for every event, I think car event and I loved it because it was interactive. But I couldn't really get into the driving or car side of it because I didn't have like a garage or anything. I knew nothing mechanically. So I was like, wow, I can be involved in cars, but I don't need to be a mechanic or a driver. I can be like this talking guy. And that's cheap to do, you know what I mean? And not a big commitment.
Is there footage from that first event you ever announced? Because I feel like that would be such a nostalgia trip.
There's nothing.
Watch.
There's nothing. Even at that point, they would have done like a dubstep montage. That's what you get out on a couple of photos. That's pretty much all you get from a drift event back then. And there was this long before live stream and all that stuff. So that happened for a couple of years, and I was still DJing. And then at some point, all the stars aligned when I was overly enthusiastic about the Irish Drift Championship at this point and Pro Drift, and I was just obsessed. I was making videos. I was doing everything I could to make it a bigger sport, even though I didn't own it or anything to do with it. I just loved it. I fell in love with the whole buzz. I just thought it was the craziest thing I'd ever seen because it was everything I loved about JDM cars, but in the most like visually dynamic thing. So I loved it, and I started learning more, started meeting more people, started interacting with more of the drivers, and trying to get better at my job of announcing. And then, the guy who owned it at one point had an opportunity to go to Dubai. He left Ireland, and he said, "Look, you be the most enthusiastic person." I had never run a business, never done anything like this before. Handed me the keys to the Irish Championship, and I decided this is it. This is the thing that I'll try. And at that point, it was funny because my dad, who works for me now, but at the time I had to take a loan from him to buy the first truck, the first van, everything. I didn't have enough money, and he was like, "Look, this is the last thing now. You've tried like college, you've tried this, you've tried everything, and you keep jumping from between things. This is it now. You either go all in on this, or it's kind of like you're on your own." And I mean, that loan was like $20,000, so it wasn't a huge amount of money. Bought a van, bought some cones, bought a little merch tent and all that kind of stuff. Went to the first year, and that year changed everything. We started with just doing a normal event, and by the end of it, we had Chris Forsberg and Vaughn, and we were bringing over these international drivers. I think the first year I did a track with Daigo and stuff, and I figured out that it was more like an entertainment product than running a drift championship. And that was something that I said, oh, hold on, it's like a concert where you bring these big stars in, and very much like we did with the LC Festival, but then you have a very serious competition element underneath it. So you're showcasing these have-a-go heroes, we call them heroes for the weekend, these guys who sign autographs on a Sunday, but they're a plumber on a Monday. We were I am fascinated that they could be a superstar for a weekend, and they're going up against these guys they only see on the internet. And we brought tons of people to that, and it was very successful. And I did the Irish Championship, and then we put in first live stream in Europe. And then the guys who owned the British Drift Championship were like, hey, you're just really too competitive with this. Our championship looks really boring because you're bringing in Daigo and you're doing live streams. So do you guys want to take the British Drift Championship? And we were like, oh, well, maybe this could be a full-time job now because we have more events. So
this is just in the States, it's a little confusing. Yeah. So there's IDC, which was you.
Which was me.
And then BDC, which is British Drift Championship. Yeah. And then now we're finding the path to how Drift Masters came about.
Sort of.
Okay.
So I had control of Irish Drift Championship and British Drift Championship. So it was kind of similar. We just did more. And the reason I did so many, at that stage we did 3. So we did an Irish Amateur Championship as well. And at that point we were doing a drift school. So we had to flesh it out a little bit because I wanted to bring some people in because it was a lot for one person to do. So I brought in a couple of different people, and I ended up running a championship in Dubai as well for 6 months. So I was kind of just taking all these jobs of running championships. And at one point I was running 6 championships, I think, at one point. But what we did with all that was we built a really good team of videographers, photographers, marketing guys that we could use. So a normal championship struggles because it's on part-time basis. Like you could say clutch kickers would be similar to that. You can't afford a guy to work on it full-time if it's only 6 weekends a year. But if you're doing 30 weekends a year, you can spread the wins and the losses and the costs across all of those. So I built this team of amazing people. The first 2 are still with me today, Keen and Josh. And Keen was the super sensible management organizer type because I was all ideas and he was all reality, which kept me on an even keel. And then Josh was a videographer who was a super talent for making it look cool and all that stuff. So we did that for a very long time. We traveled a lot with it. And what had happened originally was, so Drift Masters is owned by what you guys in the States would know as Worthouse, the team, and Peter Viansek's family. And they wanted to do a round in Ireland. And they said, okay, can you come to Poland? And we'll have this meeting about doing this round in Ireland. And the meeting progressed from, again, another conversation of me saying, I think you should do this with Drift Masters. I think you should do that. It's very Polish. It was all in Polish language at the time, but they had great production, but it was all a bit kind of, they weren't too sure what they were doing. And I said to them, why don't you just bring all the best people from all the championships in Europe, the best videographers, the best announcers, the best, into one thing, to a full European championship, and let us, do all the media and all the outside access for that. And then they said, let's give it a go. And then as casual as that, we started doing Drift Masters, and it grew into like a huge beast because you had the financial structure of Worthouse behind it. You had our experience of running events all over the world. And then you, 2 years later, add Red Bull TV in there, who have a full production team. You mash all that together and it becomes quite a big beast. Like, there's 100 staff at a Drift Masters event, and it's very, very professional. And I laugh now because, we do rehearsals and stuff for a drift event. Like, we do all this stuff behind the scenes. But it's very fun for us because it's pushing the boundaries and all that with the stadiums and stuff. So once I got to Drift Masters, I had a huge problem because Drift Masters was such a huge thing that it was difficult for me to go back to the nationals at that point and maybe have the same enthusiasm because you've got to the mountaintop and now you're going back to sort of the ground zero. So I did it for a while, but it was difficult to do, and I felt it was a little unfair on the national championships because I was splitting my attention so much that I maybe putting as much effort in. So I let the British Drift Championship go first, and then the Irish Drift Championship, and this year the Emirates, because I just didn't want to I didn't want to lose my enthusiasm for competition. And that happened that year. If you're doing an event every week, watching drifting and announcing, it gets kind of,
I can see that.
Yeah, repetitive. And you get to a point where you go, I'm not giving this driver the best opportunity of my attention because I'm just absolutely worn out of watching drifting. So then that was that. And we started doing other events and car shows and stuff. And drift games became like, we were doing car modifying and all this stuff anyway, but we never filmed it. And we said, hey, well, let's just do it for fun. See, it'd be nice to in 10 years have videos of us traveling around. We started the lifestyle brand Drift Games, and then that was a part-time project for us. It was very like, just we made a video whenever we made a video, and there was no main rhyme or reason to it. And then COVID hits, and all of a sudden, you have all your eggs in one basket with Drift Masters and all these car shows and big events, and then there's no events for probably a year and a half. So I said, hey, this Drift Games thing is the only thing we can do. Why don't we just... And it was really interesting because we were going to go bankrupt. We were probably about 3-4 weeks away from it because there was no income coming in. Everything was in events and government was helping. But obviously we had very talented and people who are expensive, and it's not going to cover them. So I said, we'll build these 2 drift cars, which we knew nothing about. We knew a bit in theory, but we just said, we'll build 2 drift cars, this Corvette and this SR20 MX-5. We'll show everyone the process. There's nothing else going on. And we'll go to the bank and we'll ask them for €100,000 to build these 2 cars as a business loan. And at the time, the government were backing the loans because it was COVID and everybody was struggling. And I said, I'll get the 100,000 for that, and I can get the sponsorship for that to cover the wages. And without that loan and without those 2 cars, the company would have folded 2 years ago. And all of a sudden, people started watching the videos. Sponsors started coming on board. People liked our sort of honest... we told everyone this was like last chance saloon for us. We were very transparent, and people kind of rallied behind us and helped us, and we dug ourselves out, and Drift Games became something that we never thought it would be. We were always the people behind the camera. We were the star was the driver or the track or the car, and then now all of a sudden we were kind of pointing the camera at ourselves, which is a normal thing in America, but not so much in Europe. You're either a driver or a videographer. It's very unusual. You would be both. And then we did that. And then the events all came back in. So all of a sudden, we're doing this Drift Games thing. It's taken off. The merch is taken off. We do all of these bashes. We have a drift school. It's all going great. Then Drift Masters comes back with a bang when the COVID thing stops. And then all of a sudden, people you to come along and have ideas, and we try and put events together. And the last year has just been wild because we're trying to be an events company, a marketing company, a merch company, a drift school, a drift organizer, top-level pro competition drifting, and a lifestyle brand and content creators. But for some reason, we have an amazing team of 6 people that do all that every day, are super passionate, and we kind of make it work. Like, we just kind of figure it out as we go.
So I've got like two questions. Like the two biggest things that I want to extract from the story are about your team and about those first two chances that you got. Because someone came up to you in the club and gave you the opportunity to announce. That would have been IDC, right?
Yeah, that would have been IDC.
So why do you think, like, think about yourself in that period in time, right? Like someone just doesn't go up to a random person and give them that opportunity. Like, describe yourself. Do you think that, were you very kind? Were you outgoing? Like, what do you think gave you that opportunity?
I think a lot of it comes from I'm a chatty guy.
Mm-hmm.
So like I chat to everybody, whether you're, the biggest driver on the grid or you're his mechanic. I'll give everybody a little bit of time because I feel everybody's got a story and everybody's got an interesting perspective on things. And I would have talked to everybody in drifting, whether I was indirect or directly doing it online or forums or whatever. And I think people just said, well, he definitely can talk and he's into cars. But also remember, Pro-Am at that time would probably have about 100 spectators, if even, probably 50 spectators. So like the guy organizing it's going, what have I to lose if he's willing to do it? Anybody could do it. I think the round before I did it, there was like no commentary for Pro-Am. So it's like, I'm literally just better than nothing. So I said, well, there's nothing to lose. And I said, every opportunity I've taken from then till now, I've always said, if I do it, and it doesn't work out, it's a good story and I have nothing to regret. And it's like a thing, I tried it, didn't work. And don't get me wrong, that whole story sounds like everything just worked out great. We tried loads of stuff that didn't work out great. But I think if you just keep trying things and your positive attitude, I think that rubs off on other people. But also I think a lot of integrity too along the way of like being an honest person. If you're not, or you're nervous or you've got a problem, just tell people that because they will have more empathy for it and kind of understand your position a little bit more. I think a lot of people try and pretend that they're super uber confident and everything's great, but we're all human at the end of the day. So I think along my journey, I've always said to people, well, I can do this really well, but this might be a problem. So give me a little bit of help there. And to be honest, I think it's been good choices along the way of people you work with, positive influences, losing the negative people, gaining the positives. And I've learned, I'm a little older now, I'm in my 30s. I'm like, I learned a lot along my way from those stories. And I think now, you know who you are, you know who you want to be around, you know what you want to do. And right back then, I would have taken any opportunity to be in cars in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
And I did I went to do Monster Energy Gymkhanas and lots of different cool stuff, and it brought me all over the world to announce. And I was like, I did no training for this. I have no idea how I'm here. And I always felt like at some point someone's going to go, how did this guy get here? But I was like, well, I'm just going to keep overwhelming everyone with enthusiasm instead of actual knowledge along the way, and it seems to have got me this far.
No, I do the same thing. Like you'd think by now I'd be comfortable on a mic in front of a crowd, but I'm always like, yo, like I don't know what I'm doing, so I just make awkward jokes and like try to reach for that awkward humor. But it's an interesting perspective just thinking about like being chatty and probably the doors that opens, right? Like if we didn't have that conversation at E-Town, and you probably started that conversation with me because I'm very introverted, and I think back and I'm like, at the event in Ireland, like there were a lot of really cool drivers, a lot of really cool companies there, and I didn't get to have a lot of conversations that I would have liked to have, and I'm just introverted. I kind of stay in my own bubble because I'm not comfortable, I guess, doing that.
But I think there's nothing wrong with any way anyone is at anything. I mean, I have guys that work for me that are introverted and they do great work in certain areas. I have other guys that are very out there. You play on your strengths, and it doesn't mean that if you've got a strength or a weakness. For example, it's like I say to people, I'm good at talking, but like I'm not a naturally gifted drifter, but I know that. So I'm trying to improve that area of my personality or my ability. I'm not very organized. I have great ideas that somehow I don't follow up because I didn't think of the 20 things that are like the reality of that situation. So I hire a guy that pretty much just tells me every day, here's the reality of what you're trying to do. I call him he's like, you got through, it's like a filter. If I can get through him, the idea is good because he's going to shut it down as much as he can until it's a real thing. So I think what I've always found is find people around you that complement what you're not good at. If you're not good at something, be honest about it and you can work around it. If you pretend that it's not a problem, it's probably a negative for your life. But if you go, look, I'm not this way, I'm not that way, it works. So I'm okay in front of a live crowd. That's not a problem for me. Not a problem with talking. But when it comes to drifting, I get very nervous.
Yeah.
Where it's probably different for you. You get in a car and you're like, I'm going to smash this. This is going to be great. It's going to be amazing.
But step out of the car and oof.
But you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
Like, and we're like the opposite. We go into battle and clutch kickers, and I'm going like, I'm no problem getting out and talking. If you told me to talk to that whole crowd and tell everyone what happened, I'm like, no problem. But in the car, I feel like, almost imposter syndrome of going, I shouldn't be here. Everyone else is really good. Why am I here? I've done nothing. I've won nothing. I shouldn't be here. Do I even know how to drift? And that's in my mindset going up to the line. So I struggle with that a little bit, and nervousness in the car. So I'm working on that. So it's different strengths. And it doesn't mean that anything's better or worse. I think especially car culture is amazing. There's so many places for everybody. If you're really, like Josh, who works for me, he's dyslexic. He like spelling for him is like a real problem, but he makes amazing videos. So he just says, I'll make the video, and when it comes to the text, you just do the text, and we find a way, you know. So if you've got a good bunch of people around you to compliment you, and it looks like you guys have that here, everybody bounces off their strengths. And I think that's what I learned over these years. One, you can't do it on your own. And two, you have to accept you're not going to be, you know, as we always say, like, I don't know if you guys have it here, but maybe it's like Madden or FIFA. Like everyone has a score on their skill, you know, like they have a little out of 100. So you have people that are better at some things than others. And if you know your scores, you'll always just pass to someone else when it's not your thing.
Yeah. No, and I don't think that necessarily people need to be extroverted to get opportunities, but I just find that, you know, the most common thing when I talk to people is they feel like they're trapped in their bubble or in their job or in their position. And it's interesting even for me to think that, you know, just talking to some strangers, what could come from it?
And I think that's the one thing that you never know who anybody is.
Yeah.
I've always said that to all my guys. We're like, you know, give time to everybody, because I always say, you might go, there's the big driver at the event. I'm going to go talk to him. Wow. And don't get me wrong, we still find it quite overwhelming when people know who we are, or we go talk to, like, we were talking to Hurt and I know Hurt from a couple of events, but Neil, who's with me, is like, this is nuts. We're talking to Hurt because he sees Hurt as that internet guy, but Hurt's a cool guy. He's so polite, nice, everything. But it's funny how, like, he will have strengths and weaknesses. Other people have strengths and weaknesses. And the more you get to know these people, but then if there's a kid coming up talking to you at an event, he could be the next Adam LZ or James Dean or Vaughan Gittin Jr. And then how you treat him is how you get on the next stage. So being nice to people, being honest, I think goes a long way. And just trying to create as many conversations and opportunities as possible. And pretty much me talking to people casually has created every single part of my business. Just, you know, sometimes you're nervous, but you just go up and say, hey, you know, not be too forward, but just try and, you know, say hello or whatever and get a little bit of repertoire with people. And it's worked really well. So I'm okay about it. I'm not extrovert, but I'm not too nervous about talking. But then other things I'm super nervous about. You know, like when we did the LZ Festival, you start going, oh my God, all the hype on this, what if we mess it up? What if something goes wrong? You know, and I'm in my probably 100th event I've run. Yeah. And I'm still nervous. I'm still like, is everything okay? Is everything going fine? And my guys are like really wound up, and we're going, well, we've done this a million times, but you still get nervous. You still doubt yourself. And I think the pulling through it once or twice, if anyone's nervous about something, the more you do it, the better it gets. That's the way I feel.
Yeah, I mean, inevitably you're going to fail at some point. Maybe not holistically, but like there's going to be the things that go wrong. And the sooner you get your foot in the door and the sooner you have that first event and figure out those speed bumps, the sooner you can make the second one better.
Yeah, but I think this is the thing, you know, a lot of people say to me, and it's funny, I mean, this is like when we were doing the LZ Festival, and you would explain this to people who know nothing about cars. And they would say, you know, how are all these people so popular, and how are all these people so, you know, sell all these tickets? And I was like, because they believed in themselves and they went and did it. Because I'm not going to say that I'm running this event, which is the largest attended Irish motorsport event, ticketed event ever in the history. And I'm not going to say anything that I'm better than anyone at anything. It's just a bit of belief. And I go, yeah, well, I'm going to do it and I'll figure it out. And I think a lot of people stumble at that first couple of steps going, oh, I can't do it. I don't believe it's going to work out. And I always had this, a lot of people say to me, oh, but what if all this car stuff just stops in like the morning, and what are you going to do? And I'm like, well, 10 years ago when I started doing car stuff, if somebody said to me, you got two options here. One is you go to a normal career and you work your way up the ladder, and you're working 10 years from now in a job you don't like, but you're making good money. Or you can go for 10 years, and this is where I'm at now, and you can travel the world, meet amazing people, follow your passion, have stories for days, forget more than people have done. And at the end of that 10 years, it all falls apart, and you end up in the job that you would have been in 10 years ago. You realize that you have nothing to lose by taking that risk, because you'll only end up where you were. Yeah. So it's actually more of a risk to stay where you are, because you will lose all that opportunity, rather than taking a risk which ends up back where you started. So I don't think people think what we do is risky sometimes. I actually think it's more risky to sort of leave your dreams behind you or your passions behind you and conform to that ideal that everything is going to fall apart in the morning if you don't conform, because I don't think that's really the construct that we're in.
No, that's a really interesting perspective. I find that a lot of people are surrounded, maybe their friend group, maybe their family, by people that kind of shoot down their goals or their hopes or their ambitions. And I can see that like really weighing on someone. And, it'd be naive of me to say like, oh, just don't surround yourself by those people. But inevitably, like I have friends who like that's their significant other. I know people that like that's just their family's demeanor. And, maybe it comes from concern or maybe it comes from being scared about someone that you care about. But maybe just trying to take that and pivot it into ambition rather than to keep you stuck where you're at. Be like, oh, they said that I can't do it, so I'm going to do it.
And I think that's the thing for me. A lot of people will dislike you for being ambitious because it comes across sometimes as arrogant, which it's not. Confidence and arrogance are very different things to different people. But I think if you go out there and say, I'm going to do this. And then Ireland is a perfect example. We, for some reason as a nation, I had issues with it in the past where people like, you start doing it pretty good and you get a couple of cool cars and people are like, oh, he's changed. He's just rich, easy for him. And then I've had conversations with people and they're like, oh, it's okay for you. And I'm going, but like, I'm the same as you 5 years ago. You know what I mean? Like there's no difference. I don't have any particular skill set that you couldn't do. And then, there's a lot of negativity. And I've found that over the last 10 years, as I got older, it's like food. If you don't like the food, stop eating it and eat the nice food. And then that's how I look at people. If someone's a positive influence, if I walk away from a conversation and they've inspired me or they would say, oh, you're doing really good, but it's constructive criticism, which I think is important too. Toxic positivity can be also another thing that's a problem. People telling you you're great all the time and then, you go,
yes, man.
Yeah. And you don't want that either.
Nope.
And so you want a little bit of like, I think you're doing okay, but you could do this, this, this. And it comes from a constructive place and they're giving you real good ideas. They're the people to keep around. And also the people that don't want anything from you other than to see you succeed and are happy to be part of your journey succeeding if it's not affecting them directly. And they're really good friends. And I have some of those that they'll be like people that I'll have a bad day and I'll ring and I'll talk with them and they'll just put you right back on the even path again. Say, no, don't worry about that. Do this, do that. Or I think you're going to also, especially, and I don't know how you deal with it, but there's going to obviously be a lot of people that want to benefit from your success, that want to take advantage of your position, and their motives might not be completely honest and that kind of stuff. And I think that's just part of life. I think that works. You've got to be careful to watch out for it. But I think also, after a while, you see the signs, you see the red flags, you see people that are kind of just there for what they want out of it and they don't want to do it themselves. So I always say, if you want to be successful, you be successful and I will support you whatever way you can, but you can't always be successful like through me or because I have to bring you there. So I think if you've got your own stuff going on, I'll give you every bit of help and advice. And, there's a lot of people that want to do what we do. And I'm like, they find it so surprising. I will send like other organizers my entire spreadsheets, all the things I paid for, because I'm like, I know you have no one to reference this stuff off. Here's everything that you need. Smash it, and I'm going to come drive at your event if it works out. Go for it. There's enough room for everybody in this. But when people try and put you down to make them better, that's when you draw that line and go, okay, this is damaging now. This is not we're all going up the tree together. You're pulling me down. So I've come across this a million times, and I'm at a point now in my life where I have a great group of people around me. I'm very positive. I have the real people around me that say, yeah, that's a terrible idea, Dave. That's not going to work at all. That's just stupid. And I go, yeah, probably stupid. And then every one of my 20 ideas is a good one, and that's the one we run with. But I think that's a good thing. I think it's just your environment, I think, creates you. And I think that if you have a very solid, positive environment, you'll always do quite well out of it, because your attitude and your positivity will kind of get you out of every bad space you're in. And I think that's what showed when we were in COVID. I'm an events company. All the events stop, and 2 years later, we're better than we ever were. And that comes from all my team sitting around going, look, we're going to get through this. We're going to do it. My guys were offering to drive FedEx trucks just to get us through that period. And they were going to ground. They were like, no, we're going to go and sell whatever, garden furniture. You know what I mean? And we're going to get through this. And when we get out of it, and again, I was able to reward their loyalty afterwards. And the thing is, they're still working as hard day one as they are today, and they're just an amazing bunch of people. And that really is my success, is my ability to pick those people, put them together, and sort of manage their journey a little bit, and they all succeed together. So I think you're right. Environment, positivity, fun times, and keeping it lighthearted too helps a lot. But don't listen to the people that don't want the best for you, and then you're kind of always on an even path.
So on the topic of your team, I feel like the most relatable and the most challenging thing that any business owner ever experiences is their first employee. So take me back to what was going through your head? Like, was it a necessity? Were you overwhelmed? Was it a challenge for you to give up control? Like, who was your first employee, if you want to talk about it? Like,
So that's the only bit that I've cheated on this whole journey, is that my first employee was the best first employee of all time.
oh yeah?
So I went to Dubai, and this kid had done a video in Ireland. He's from the UK, Josh, and he had done this really cool video of one of my events. And it was funny because I hired people to do this video, and they were rubbish, and they didn't do as good a job as this guy that was doing it for free. And I said, this guy's got a great talent. So I went to Dubai, and I needed a videographer to cover certain things we were doing there, doing activations and stuff. And I rang the first videographer, who like might be the best guy. And he was like, well, I'm going to need expenses. I'm going to need this. And how many days am I there? And what's the hours? And blah, blah, blah. And I was like, I don't really know. And I kind of said, let me get back to you. Second guy wants tons of money, tons of like just money. And everything was about money. I was like, oh, he doesn't really feel like he wants to be a passion part of this. It's just kind of going through the motions. Third option was Josh. And I rang him, and he was like, yeah, when am I going? And I was like, Wednesday week. And he was like, oh, cool. Let me just get some things in order, and I'll see you there. Just give me the tickets or whatever. He didn't ask me where he was staying, what he was earning, nothing. Just arrived off a plane. Had never even met me properly at that point. And this is awkward because I was going to the airport, and I was like, this guy's going to be working with me every day now for like months, and I don't know who he is. And
So you hired him for months at that point, or just for the event?
he was there for 6 months. In this,
Oh, wow.
Yeah, but it wasn't my money. I was managing another business, so it was like an employee of that business. So it was easier for me to say, well, whatever. And he arrived, and like within a couple of days, I was like, oh, this guy is on my level. We were up for fun, very creative, you know, probably pushing way beyond what we were expected to do just to make cool videos and pushing ourselves. We always like to make things as good as we could. And then the next year I said, hey, you want to like do stuff with the Irish Drift Championship? So he would come over and spend 2 weeks in my house, not full time, like part time. And then the year after, as I said, I bought out the British Drift Championship and stuff like that. And I was like, I need a full-time videographer. And he was then just living in my house. And he lived in my house for 4 years. And he's just the nicest guy. He's so humble, doesn't understand how talented he is. He's funny. He's stupid, but accepts that he's stupid at times and just lets everyone make fun of him because it's the betterment of the whole situation. And he's never really asked me for anything. And he's working for me now, 6 or 7 years? Never asked me for anything. Never asked for a pay rise. Never asked for anything. And that's why he's so rewarded for me, because he's there for the real long run. And I gave him a part of the company. I give him a pay rise every year, even though he goes, are you sure? And to give you an example of him, it was like, I wrote a contract for him, and he passed it back to me and goes, will you check that and see if it's okay? And I was like, I wrote the contract, Josh, obviously. So he's like, he trusts us. It's beyond, it's friendship. And next March, he's going to be the best man at my wedding. Wow. So that's where that journey's come from. We've been all over the world. And to be honest, we've been in so many bad situations that nobody would ever know about, that you grow a bond in those bad situations as well, of like pulling through when it's really grimy and you're being screwed over and everyone knows how upset you are, but you can't say it publicly because you just want to keep everyone, you know what it's like behind the scenes, and you need somebody just to go, I need to just vent like a motherfucker for like 2 hours here in this journey. So just let me go. And then at the end of it, he goes, yeah, you know, that's the guy you can say anything to. So like a rock, you know. And then I have another employee, Keen. Again, I cheated again. This guy is the most unbelievably organized guy in the world. And he's such a business-minded person. He's just always making the process, and he makes sure we deliver on everything so nobody's ever annoyed with us. And as it went from there, we hired another guy, Adam, and we hired another guy recently called Davidis, and Blaine, another videographer who's almost like Josh again, who's just another super sound guy. I've been so lucky with these guys. But then along the way, there's employees that don't fit into the mold and they don't work, and you have arguments and you have issues and you have negativity, and those guys, you know, unfortunately had to go because they were going to pull the whole kind of ship down. And we're becoming the topic of conversation most of the time, you probably understand, and they become a constant bitch or a constant moan, and you just go, I just need to get rid of this, and it's harsh and you don't want to, and you like the person a lot, but for business, and that's a hard part of what people watch us so publicly, more so you than me, but like they watch you so publicly and they think, you know, these are all characters in a show, and like it's like Game of Thrones, and a character got killed off, and people are pissed off, and you're going, it's like,
it's a great analogy.
Yeah, it's like a character got killed off. That was my favorite character, and you're going, yeah, but it didn't fit the narrative of where the story was going in the show. So someone has to have some element of that, you know. Or
behind the scenes, that character was bitching because they only wanted red Skittles, and they were getting a pack of Skittles, and you're just like, yo, dude, like you're getting Skittles at all, bro.
And to be fair, there's a lot of that. And again, what I would say is, and this is one thing that if anyone's watching your stuff. No matter who you are, whether you're, you know, you got one car, you got a million cars, you're the richest person in the world, everything normalizes to you. So when somebody comes to work for my company, like initially you're like, I'm traveling, I'm doing all these drift events, this is my job, it's unbelievable. You wouldn't believe how normal that becomes after about 6 months to a year, and that person just doesn't see it at all anymore and thinks, this is shit, this is bullshit, I'm doing this, I'm doing that. And they were the one, you know, maybe begging you for the job at the start. They're doing what they want to do, they're living their dream, but maybe don't understand what's happening and get a little bit caught in the small things rather than the bigger picture, and that doesn't really work in the long term. So we've had a lot of those issues. I mean, these are great people that have worked for me, and I've fallen out with people along the way. I think that's business. I've made best men at my wedding. I've had people fall out with me. I've had arguments, I've ups and downs, and as life goes on, you realize that's normal. It's totally normal for people to not get on, to have arguments, to clash, to have people you get on with better than others. That's just human nature. So there's no perfection in this. And I think sometimes people think, oh, everything's just so perfect there. I'm like, there is no perfect in any business or anywhere it goes. So I'm happy that I've learned that over time. So I don't have high expectations of everybody. I kind of feel like, look, as long as people are happy and they're doing what they do, and we're good. And I'm very lucky. As I said, I cheated a little bit because I was very lucky with the employees I got. And I would say at this point, they're like partners more than employees. And a lot of these guys have a piece in our business, and I'm so happy they do, because there's no business without them as far as I'm concerned.
No, that's a really interesting perspective on just how different it is being a company in the public eye, because, you know, your typical company, whether it's a media company, a brick and mortar company, like they have turnover. Like the same employees aren't with them forever. So like being on the forefront of YouTube or being in the forefront of a drift series, like there's a lot more eyes watching, and it seems like this huge dramatic thing when someone leaves the team, but like that's life.
Yeah, and people have different ambitions, you know. I mean, I'm sure something suits for a while, and then, like, for example, a lot of the times with us, it's like, you know, you look at the future and you say, we're traveling, like we're doing, I think this year I did like, I don't know, it was like 20 something weekends in a row, and you don't know if you can do that forever. But if I can do it forever, maybe one of my guys can't do it. He might have some kids, and he might have, you know, want to be more at home and do this and do that. And he might say, I loved my journey here, but this is not what I want to do. And it's an amicable split. But maybe people from the outside think something dramatic has happened. And, you know, sometimes people are like, I want to go do something else or try something else. And as I said, they've normalized to what we're doing. And they say, I want to try another thing, or I want to go, you know, settle down, play golf, whatever. And you go, that's absolutely fine. It's a journey, you know. So I think people will always rotate in companies, but you don't go to like your local Amazon and go, let me see who's here this year compared to last year. You know, that doesn't happen. Yeah. You don't care.
So you mentioned bringing on a couple new people recently. I'm curious for those people watching that are like, maybe, you know, I want to get involved in a drift series. A lot of people want to get involved being a crew member on a race team. How are you hiring the people that you're hiring? Like, what is your experience? Is it a casual meeting? Do they send an application? Like, how does that work for you?
So everyone I've hired, bar maybe one or two who do very specific jobs that have experience in that area, but the majority do it for free. I know this sounds terrible because people do this, but I'm going to be a little harsh now on how this happens. So a lot of my guys were on the media side, and they would be going to events making amazing content. Like really good content, writing articles, very articulate, as a hobby and has a passion. And for me as a business owner, that shows that they love it, because this is like a kind of an unrewarded job. Like we go to drift events and people just share photos of our cars to us, and we go, they've had to sit there for like 3-4 hours, not paid, and just make all this stuff happen. And because it's social media now, you kind of think that's normal. But if it's really good and you know that they've got a talent or got a skill, those are the people that I would generally approach and say, look, you've been doing this self-motivated yourself, and I want a piece of this on my side. I want you to focus that towards me and my company. However, the opposite, when people say, if you give me the opportunity, I will do X, Y, Z, to me sounds a little suspect, because that's like when, you know, a sponsor or whatever, you go, if you gave me $1 million, I would build a Lamborghini drift car. And you know, you obviously have to be doing something at the start to get people's interest, or at least have some skin in the game. So a lot of those guys that did that, I would have watched their talented stuff. And I will be honest and say that not everybody is going to get that opportunity, because not everybody's good. And that's just a very harsh reality of, you could have 50 media at an event, or 50 guys doing a job, or 50 guys doing it free, for example, and probably 1 to 2 have the spark, have that thing that makes them exceptional. And unfortunately, the rest will always be a hobby for those people. It's not like you just do it for 10 years and you automatically get a job. I think talent comes into it a little bit there, and perseverance, and maybe talent and commitment are the same thing, that people have put a lot more effort in to do a really good job. So that was kind of where I picked up a lot of those employees, from events that I watched and went, this guy is just shit hot. Like everything he does just turns to gold. Let's work together.
No, I really like that. I've never thought about that from a media person's perspective. You know, obviously on a crew or a team, you're not just going to walk up and start working on someone's car, but there are plenty of media people that go to events, and you know that it is really smart. Get your work out there and get noticed on that front. I agree with you. Like, never really thought about it, but if someone like messaging you asking for jobs, thinking that they could do all this stuff, it's like, why aren't you already doing it?
Yeah, you'd be already there. So in the people that I've hired, for example, on Drift Masters, all of our media team are accomplished people in that sport. I know their work. I know if I'm hiring them, like I have a guy from Speed Hunters who does my photography, Jordan Butters, and I think he's one of the best photographers of drifting in the world. I know that it's like a little toy. You wind him up and I send him away for 3 days. And he comes back every evening with unbelievable stuff. Like you're going, it's a child in the grandstand screaming at a driver in the back. You're like, where did he even come up with this stuff? You know what I mean? And then I'm looking through the photos and it's like blurred lights and it's just every motion from the event you're capturing. You're going, well, that's him in for the next, 5 years. And, he's giving me what I want. And a lot of people, I think, don't have that ability. And I think it's the same with a mechanic, for example. You have to look at them and say, is he already out there doing great work? Is he doing good stuff? Is he self-motivated? Is he, and I'm sure from your perspective, and I'm only assuming here, but like Mike, had the motivation to make his own YouTube channel, was making videos, was doing it anyway. So it's not like you're picking up someone off the street going, I wonder, will he be any good?
I think, it's hard for me to recall the exact situation, but I think Mike had already been going to the track. I think he might have made videos for a couple of my friends, and I don't remember if I paid him or if he just made a video for me for fun, but that is what started our relationship.
And it was taking a chance. And I mean, it's not going to happen for everybody, but that's the same in every industry. You can't just, it's a bit of a sport, like you got to go in there. And again, if there's a lot of guys out there, I would say in Drift Masters, I'm going to go on a limb here and say 90% of the crew behind the scenes aren't paid to be there, but some of them are. And basically that crew pushes that driver and that driver gets the deal and that driver pays the crew. And I think that's kind of a team effort thing that happens with people sacrificing time, money, interest, whatever, and their skill set to try and get better and be better. And I think a lot of people nowadays like the instant reward of like, oh, I went to one event, why haven't I paid to be here kind of thing. And you're like, well, it's not going to happen that easy. And it's a hard road. And especially in what we do with cars and car culture and all that, it's very selective. Not a lot of people get paid in it. And also, you got to work really hard and be very creative to stand out. I mean, everyone can buy a camera and take photos, but to take bangers or to really good videos or really good social or come up with cool cars or whatever, nowadays it takes a lot because there's so much of it. To stand out is difficult. Back in the day, it's easier because there was less competition. Now there's a lot more people that know how to use a camera, and also the technology kind of does a lot of the work for you. So I think for me, it's like if you want to get involved, I think I'm as good an inspiration as any. I'm not a particularly great driver. I don't know how to work a camera most of the times, and I'm a vlogger. I build car projects on a channel, and I'm not even that mechanically minded. So if I can do it on sheer enthusiasm and probably working harder than other people to make it work, then anybody can do it. And that's what I say to everyone. It's like, I'm not special in any way. I just believe I can do it. And if I couldn't, I didn't care, because I gave it a go anyway. So it didn't matter. I didn't lose anything.
Now, if you're watching this, I don't recommend taking out a $100,000 loan to build a car to start your YouTube channel.
I did that 10 years in, so it was a little
he
bit
had
different.
relationships. From the outside, I could see someone be like, all right, I'm racking up the credit card and start my YouTube.
Don't do that.
I always push people, and I try to mention a lot in this podcast, the concept of starting lean, right? Like, if you're going to start a YouTube channel, like, you don't need a crazy camera, like, you don't need the craziest build. Like, you could just go wrench on your daily with filming on your iPhone, and personality is the most important thing.
Hugely. And I'll give you a perfect example of that. While I'm up here making this podcast, down in your workshop is another Irish YouTuber called Neil from Juicebox. And it's very funny how we've kind of started this journey totally separate ways. So I've done tons of car builds, lots of competitive drifting, expensive stuff. Like, you need a lot of budget and all that stuff. He found an A86 in a hedge about 5 years ago, and his friends and him just decided to restore this 86. And he has nearly as many subscribers, if not the same or more than me. So he's made that personality of his bunch of friends in his shed doing what they're doing. He didn't care if he became a YouTuber. He's still not a YouTuber. He still works a normal job. And this is the first trip that he's been on to see maybe from you guys a little bit of inspiration of where it can go, because around him maybe there was a lot of people that didn't say, oh, that's not a real thing, you can't do that, it's not a real job. And he's starting to see a little bit of, you know, inspiration. But he's got like 30 or 40,000 subscribers from just him and his friends having fun, nonsense most of the time. I think the last video he bought 50 Japanese head units just to listen to what CDs and tapes were in them all, and like this is just his
like they came with CDs and tapes.
Yeah, from the cars. So he was just playing them to see what was like a 1996 tape would have on it. And this is entertainment, and it doesn't have to be building, you know, the biggest, fanciest supercar, or it doesn't have to be anything about money. It can just be you and your friends enjoying cars or whatever it may be, or enjoying, I don't know, video games or whatever it may be. Personality goes a long way, but be yourself. Do what you love, because if you're going to do it for a long time, like Neil loves his 86, he's not going to build a car for the views, and that's another big mistake that people do. If you go out there and try and, I think we could probably do more views and stuff if we just went on the niche thing that everyone wants us to do. But I always said, look, if it falls apart in the morning, I actually would like to own these cars or have these cars.
What do you mean the niche thing?
As in, like, if you said, the trending thing. So like you said, everybody's building dune buggies this week, we're going to build a dune buggy with nitrous, and you go, I have no interest in it, but I'll do it for the views. Then it's a job again, because you're not yourself, you're pretending to be enthusiastic about it. And then it's like you're not going to come across naturally happy about the situation. And I think that's where a lot of people go into YouTube and say, I'm going to do the trending thing and get there, and in 2 weeks I'm going to be like a huge YouTuber. And I'm going, well, what's going to happen is none of that. And what you're better off doing is doing what you would do anyway, and film it and have fun. So even if you don't be successful in it, or you're not, 10 years from now you can look back at you and your stupid friends in a shed doing stupid shit and go, I have all this on film, it's great. And it's actually worth more than the money and the ad revenue at that point if you're looking back and seeing all the cool stuff you did, which is probably what you could do someday down the line. You could start the first Adam LZ episode you ever did and go, I'm going to watch back all this, see what happens.
I know.
I can't remember.
That'd be crazy. I was going to say, you're saying it backwards, because the niche is what YouTube thrives on.
Yeah,
right?
Sorry, I meant trend.
People always ask me, and I'm like, yo, like, make shit that you want to watch, right? If you have the weirdest passion for listening to cars timing belt noises, like, make your channel about that, because you're way better off finding 15 other dudes like you that are going to live, eat, and breathe your content than making a video of, I don't know, maybe a cam chop that 100 people like, but they can go watch at 100 different. That's terrible examples, but like smaller people that are more passionate about your stuff versus.
Yeah, and I think that's a great advice. I mean, the one thing I will say is that what's admirable is that, you know, a lot of like guys that I've met through, I mean, this is education for me, seeing how you guys operate and seeing, you know, I mean, I love the business part of it, of saying, how does all this work? And, you know, getting a little vibe for it, and gives me a little inspiration, because you've gone down the path that I'd like to go down, but not that I want to do it the same way, but just you've probably hit some hurdles along the way that I could go, oh, that's interesting. And I spent a week in Ireland traveling around with Jimmy Oakes, and I was like just listening to his story, and I was like, oh, that's because you don't get to talk to too many people from my side of the world who do the same kind of thing. And don't get me wrong, I'm not on the same level as you or Jimmy, but just to feel like, oh, I have these issues and they have those issues, and that's normal, and everybody feels the same way about things. And I thought they would have all this sussed, but it seems like they go through the same struggles and pain as we all do. And what I do love about it, you and Jimmy especially, and Khaled and everyone, you're doing what you want to do. And I think that's the right way to do it. You have longevity. You've got people who will feed off your passion, and they'll say, he loves this shit. Like he's doing stupid stuff, but he loves it. And they'll either A, love it because you love it, and they like seeing people enjoy things, or two, they'll love it because they feel the same. When you do stuff that you don't really have much passion for, it comes across, I think, quite false. And I think a lot of people fall down that rabbit hole of like, I'm going to make a Lamborghini video because, you know, Daily Driven Exotics did it. And I'm like, well, a long way to go to catch up there, but also you don't have a Lamborghini and you don't really like Lamborghinis, and that's where you'll fall apart.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I guess to wrap it up, since we're both hungry and I'm excited for Dave to experience not only the Chaser but the Turbo S, if we could wrap this into 3 bullet point things that you would advice that you would give to anyone wanting to start a business, start a channel, start a company, whatever. I know we talked about a few on here.
Yeah, but I would say one is know your limits. Look at yourself analytically and say, what am I good at and what I'm not good at, and get other people to do the things that you're not good at, even if it's a favor at the start, or your friend that's better at design than you are. Second thing I would say is, you know, don't try and do it too fast. Build at your own pace. Everyone wants to get rich and famous overnight. No one has ever really done that. it's a 1 in a billion.
Well, when that happens too, they fall way faster too.
Exactly, because they're built on a cardboard house. You know what I mean? Of like, or what do you call it, a deck of cards, it just falls down. And the third thing is enjoy what you do, because if you don't enjoy it, it becomes a job, and you'll treat it like any other job. If you enjoy it, you'll do more of it. You'll do later hours. You'll stay up at night. You'll do stupid road trips that are too long with too much noise, and you'll build cars that are pointless and overpriced, and you'll do it all and realize it's nonsense, but you enjoy it, so the nonsense makes sense. And then if it doesn't feel like work, you're better than the other guy who's doing it as work. So they'd be my 3 bullet points on, I think, what I've learned. And sometimes I struggle with those 3 myself, but at the same time, I think there are 3 things I've learned over 10 years of doing this. They're kind of my 3 MOs.
Cool. Well, no, that's amazing. And for coming to this with no agenda, I feel like your story connected so well with all these like tidbits of advice. Like, I'm stoked. You got me stoked on doing podcasts again.
Well, I hope you do more, because I'm doing a lot of traveling, and I'm trying to listen to them, and you're like, wow, I've listened to all the other ones, Adam, and now there's not one for a year.
As stupid as it sounds, not having the Blitz 03s on the wall has been like the biggest hurdle of me not wanting to do my podcast, because it's always been like, oh, once the Blitz are on the wall, then my backdrop's good, then I'll start doing them again.
The procrastination is phenomenal, and we all do it. We're like, well, the place is a mess. I can't do audio-only podcasts.
The windows don't go to the floor. How could I do a podcast when the windows don't go to the floor, Dave?
The acoustics are all wrong in here.
They are pretty bad in here.
But yeah, I'm looking forward to doing some more interviews. And again, it's a nice way of listening to people's stories, because I think it's like the behind the curtain stuff for a lot of the kind of, I would say, the more, well, I'm not one of those, but one of those well-known people that that come by here all the time. It's fun to hear their journey, and I think a lot of people at home will relate to a lot of their struggles or their issues, so it might make them feel better and more ambitious. So hopefully that's the case.
Absolutely. So where can people find you if they want to see more of your stuff?
Yeah, so obviously we run Drift Masters. That's 6 times a year, but we are on Drift Games. Drift Games is our YouTube channel, our lifestyle brand. We do events and all that good stuff, and we kind of travel around looking at stuff and going, look at that, look at this. That's kind of our thing, where we just, Irish guys being confused, looking at American things or Middle East things or European things, and we build a lot of cool cars too. Well, cool to us, but similar to what you do, but in a more Irish way with a lot more accents.
Cool. Well, thank you. It's been a pleasure having you on the Scenic Route podcast, and let's go drive some cars.
Absolutely. Thanks, Adam.
Yeah.